Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from website The Guardian. This article is titled, "The Saints Clergy Abuse Emails, 5 Takeaways from Our Investigation." This has, in bold red letters, New Orleans Clergy Abuse linked to it. The subtitle under it reads, "The Guardian/WWL Louisiana report exposes behind-the-scenes messaging to manage a bombshell clergy abuse scandal." They also have links to other articles such as Crisis Communications. Emails show how NFL's Saints and NBA's Pelicans helped New Orleans church spin abuse scandal. Another link, here are prominent people named in the Saints clergy abuse emails. And finally, linked, what Saints and church officials said and what their emails say. Below that, we see multiple faces of the white men involved in the clergy abuse scandal. This was written by Ramon Antonio Vargas and David Hammer of WWL Louisiana in New Orleans. I begin reading the article. The Guardian and WWL Louisiana have obtained emails showing how top officials at the NFL's Saints and NBA's Pelicans spent a year collaborating with New Orleans Roman Catholic Archdiocese as the organization sought to soften media coverage about the church's management of a decades-old clergy abuse scandal in their city, linked here. An investigation of the emails shows how the communications call into question statements made over the last 5 years by the Louisiana billionaire Gayle Benson's 2 professional sports franchises that sought to minimize their role in trying to help the church deal with the scandal's fallout once they got involved in the summer of 2018. Linked here. Nonetheless, in a lengthy statement from a team attorney on Saturday, the Saints insisted they had accurately portrayed their involvement. Below is a summary of key points made in the lengthy report that WWL Louisiana and The Guardian published after an extensive review of the emails in question, contained in hundreds of pages of documents that vividly show how fierce the friendship is between Benson, a devout Catholic as well as prolific church donor, and New Orleans Archbishop Gregory Amond. First, Saints and Pelicans spokesperson Greg Bensel described a conversation with then New Orleans District Attorney Leon Canizzaro that, quote, allowed us to take certain people off the list, end quote, of credibly accused clergy abusers published by the church in the fall of 2018. In the most striking example of the coordinated messaging campaign he was helming, Benson, the team's vice president of communications, employed abbreviations commonly used for, quote, conference call, end quote, and, quote, with, end quote, to report that there had been a, quote, CCW, end quote, New Orleans district attorney at the time, Leon Canizzaro, on the evening before the church released a credibly accused clergy abuser list in November 2018. Excuse me. Quote, had a CC with Leon Canizzaro that allowed us to take certain people off the list, end quote. Bensel wrote to Saints and Pelicans president Dennis Lauscha, though Bensel has consistently denied in public that his organizations had any input with respect to who went on that disclosure. Quote, the list will get updated, and that is our message that we will not stop here today, end quote. Canizzaro has consistently denied such a conversation took place. When asked by WWL Louisiana in 2020 if he had any input on the contents of the church's credibly accused list, Canizzaro said, quote, no, end quote. Also that same year, a Canizzaro spokesperson wrote in an email to an Associated Press reporter that Canizzaro, quote, was not consulted about the composition of the Archdiocese, quote, credibly accused, end quote, list, nor did he or anyone from, parentheses, his, end parentheses, office have input into its assembly, end quote, and overall quote. And more recently, Canizzaro said, quote, I did not at any time ask the Archdiocese or tell the Saints to tell the Archdiocese quote, remove this name from the list, end quote, end overall quote. The Guardian asked Canizzaro about a 29 October 2018 typed message informing him of a call from the Archdiocese General Counsel at the time, Wendy Vitter. Vitter, now a federal judge, was, quote, following up on conversation you had with Archbishop Amond, end quote, according to the message left for Canizzaro just 4 days before the list's release. Canizzaro has since said, quote, if I was in a conversation with him, I would have been looking for any records he would have had relative to complaints made against priests so we could reach out to those victims to see if there was a prosecutable case, end quote. He added, quote, I do not ever remember having a conversation with the saints about any case going on with our office, end quote, at that specific time. The saints' lawyer's statement on Saturday also said that no one from the team spoke with Canizzaro. Instead, Bensel's email to Lascia referred, quote, to a conversation that he was told had occurred between a member of the staff of the Archdiocese and ... Canizzaro concerning the list, end quote, and how it would be updated. A statement from the Archdiocese on Saturday echoed the saints and Canizzaro in saying, quote, no one from the team, in parentheses, or the New Orleans District Attorney's Office had any role in compiling the credibly accused, end parentheses, list, or had any say in adding or removing anyone from the list, end quote. Canizzaro's office later filed charges against one clergyman on the list, George Brignac, though the deacon died awaiting trial in 2020. Canizzaro later became the chief of the Criminal Cases Division at the Louisiana State Attorney General's office. Point 2. The Saints and Pelicans' top spokesperson, Greg Bensel, involved the organizations in the Archdiocese clergy-abuse scandal with the blessing of the team's owner, and without being asked to do so by the church. In July 2018, Bensel asked Benson if she would offer his services as a crisis communicator to Amond, citing the experience Bensel had accumulated working in the NFL since the 1990s. Benson, who has been a friend of the Archbishop for years, thanked Bensel and said she would pass on the offer to Amond. In September 2018, Bensel wrote in an email to the president of a Catholic school from which he graduated that he had been with Amond on Benson's boat in July 2018 when a damning news story appeared about Brignac, who was accused of molesting dozens of children and had been removed from ministry for 20 years, still being allowed to read scripture at masses. That was months before Bensel and other team officials helped the church with the release of a list of credibly accused clergy in November 2018. Benson said in 2020 that Bensel helped the church in the weeks leading up to the release of the list. The Saints' attorney's statement said Bensel only got involved at the behest of New Orleans-based federal judge Jay Zaney, who, according to the emails and timestamps from them, would have had to make that entreaty offline before the article on the abusive deacon was published, or very shortly thereafter. Zaney has publicly acknowledged making such a suggestion at some point. Quote, other local civic leaders, end quote, also asked Bensel to get involved, the Saints statement said, without elaborating. Below that, we see an image in black and white of Greg Bensel. White male, some gray in his hair, on the phone call with someone. I continue reading. Point 3. Bensel then solicited feedback and support from influential allies. Bensel remained in constant touch with Amond's Archdiocese as it prepared, and then published, the list of dozens of priests and deacons who faced credible allegations of child molestation while serving the church in New Orleans. That included prepping Amond for media interviews, and the Archbishop would use talking points suggested by Bensel. Though he claimed he was operating in his personal capacity, Bensel used his Saints email address with a signature containing the NFL and NBA's logos throughout the communications. Bensel directly lobbied local media outlets to highlight Amond's courage in releasing the list, which was meant as an act of conciliation and transparency after a series of local and national scandals revived the unresolved issue of clergy abuse. Side note, it's still unresolved. Continuing reading. On occasion, the outlets Bensel contacted would subsequently produce pieces whose tone he complimented. It is, however, unclear exactly when those pieces had been planned. He also solicited, and frequently received, feedback and moral support on the messaging campaign from Benson, Lasha, Zaney, and Vitter, the wife of the former Republican U.S. Senator David Vitter. Linked here. Benson and Lasha used their saints' email addresses as well. Zaney, who has served on the governing board of the New Orleans Archdiocese-run college that educates prospective priests, at one point told Bensel he was confident that Amen's, quote, sincerity, end quote, would, quote, open, end quote, the, quote, minds and hearts, end quote, of the public. He referred to Amen in one instance as, quote, our shepherd, end quote. The judge later recused himself from any rulings directly involving the archdiocese, but he went on to rule in a case involving a Catholic religious order that a 2021 Louisiana law enabling clergy abuse survivors and others to seek damages over decades-old child molestation was unconstitutional. Zaney's ruling was in effect negated when Louisiana State Supreme Court later upheld the law. Zaney declined comment for this report. Side note, I'm not surprised, and Zaney needs to be on the list of names that should be forever remembered. Continuing on to point 4, the emails show how the saints and the church's close coordination on media messaging only stopped after a July 2019 subpoena. Benson, and Lasha continued to coordinate with the Archdiocese about how to respond to news stories about the clergy abuse crisis or other more general matters involving the respective organizations for almost 8 months beyond the release of the clerical molester list. In one instance, Amen successfully asked the saints for Benson to submit an opinion letter to a local newspaper praising the New Orleans church's work combating sex trafficking and advocating for children's safety online, linked here. That was about 5 years before Louisiana State Police would allege having probable cause to suspect the Archdiocese in prior decades had sexually trafficked minors. Coincidental? I think not. Continuing on, the saints on Saturday said that the letter was not, quote, misleading, end quote, and did not excuse, quote, the misconduct of members of the clergy, end quote. In another instance, Bensel wrote about preparing Amen for an interview with the same newspaper about the effect of the clergy abuse scandal on church finances, linked here. Side note, I wonder why the clergy abuse scandal would diminish your finances. Is that because people are getting wise to the fact that you won't actually change major issues and actually cause a bunch of issues that horribly impact victims for years and decades, and you will apologize and hide and shuffle molesters? Anyway, continuing on. One of the clergy abuse lawsuits that drove the Archdiocese to seek bankruptcy protection in 2020 resulted in a subpoena for copies of all communications among saints and church officials. The plaintiff's attorneys who obtained the subpoena said the order was necessary because the case's discovery process turned up emails and other evidence establishing that Bensel was advising the Archdiocese on how to navigate its clergy abuse scandal. The saints and the church complied with the subpoena, but fought in court to keep the news media from accessing copies of the communications. They also issued statements strongly saying that they had only communicated with Amen's Archdiocese to handle, quote, pending media attention, end quote, in the lead-up to the release of the clergy abuser list. On Saturday, the team's statement summarized its involvement as, quote, public relations assistance provided to the Archdiocese of New Orleans, in anticipation of press interest in the publication of a list of clergy who were credibly accused of abuse, end quote. Point 5. The church wrote up several questions it wanted the Archbishop to be asked on his one live, on-air interview on the day the list was released. Bensel forwarded the questions to the interview host, who asked at least half of them in similar form and let the Archbishop give the remaining answers unprompted. On the day the clergy abuser list was published, Eamon granted his only live interview that day to former local area sheriff and afternoon radio show host Newell Normand. Normand's employer, WWL Radio, has long held the exclusive rights to the Saints' local broadcasts, and Bensel brokered the conversation through emails involving the manager of the radio station, which, despite its call letters, is not affiliated with the TV channel WWL Louisiana. 2 days before the interview, an archdiocese spokesperson sent Bensel 8 questions for Normand to ask Eamon. Bensel essentially forwarded the questions to Normand and the host station director while saying the suggested inquiries were, quote, a great framework, end quote. Normand, who alluded to his Catholic upbringing and a struggle to accept the reality of the clergy abuse crisis, ultimately asked about half of the suggested questions in similar form to the way they were proposed. Eamon answered the rest unprompted. In the years since, on his show, Normand has criticized Eamon's handling of the local Catholic clergy abuse crisis. A statement on Saturday from the corporation that owns WWL Radio, Odyssey, said, quote, WWL stands by its coverage of this story. We have no additional comment, end quote. Here ends the article. Below that is a blurb requesting a donation to The Guardian. Please consider donating if you haven't yet done so. Honestly, a lot of this feels very similar to the other sexual abuse scandals, except one step further. The WELS has long been jealous of the Catholics' ability to be involved and engaged and quoted extensively in media regarding their involvement in social events and pop culture events and other events that have huge impact on just everyday citizens' lives. I'm sure they're also very jealous of the fact that the Catholic Church, especially in certain areas such as New Orleans here, their connections and their not just connections to people in power, but connections to people who can help them potentially soften the messaging and make them look like they're better people. Because you need that, right? You need that for child sexual abuse cases, media, and political connections, ultimately helping you to form a more soft narrative, or at least help soften whatever blows are being taken against you so that you look like maybe not necessarily innocent completely, but you look better than other churches that are suffering because they ignore child sexual abuse and cover up for abusers and shift around abusers. I wouldn't be surprised if the Catholic Church did reach out to Bensel. These other local civic leaders are not named, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had a connection to a local civic leader and had that unnamed leader reach out to Bensel. Anyway, what stands out to you the most, especially considering the most recent sexual abuse allegation against the WELS coming from Thiensville and their former athletic director that's been all over the news lately? Is it the fact that the church is complicit in covering up again? Or maybe it's something else. Leave a comment down below. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.
Break the hard chains of fate. Roads we walk, we create.